Hello, everyone, and welcome to Charles Eisenstein's webinar on his new book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, presented by North Atlantic Books and nabcommunities.com. The More Beautiful World is the second title in North Atlantic's Sacred Activism series, which also includes Occupy Spirituality by Matthew Fox and Adam Bucko, as well as Collapsing Consciously by Carolyn Baker. The Sacred Activism series presents leading voices that embody the tenets of sacred activism, compassion, service, and sacred consciousness, while addressing the crucial issues of our time and inspiring radical action. North Atlantic is excited to introduce Charles Eisenstein, a teacher, speaker, and writer focusing on themes of civilization, consciousness, money, and human cultural evolution. His writings on the web magazine Reality Sandwich have generated a vast online following, and he speaks frequently at conferences and other events. Eisenstein graduated from Yale in 1989 with a degree in mathematics and philosophy and spent the next 10 years as a Chinese to English translator. Also the author of Sacred Economics and the Ascent of Humanity, he currently lives in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. Information about his work and future appearances can be found at charleseisenstein.net. In today's webinar, he'll talk about overcoming cynicism, frustration, and paralysis in the face of our current planetary crisis, and how to become a more effective agent of positive change through increased awareness of interconnectedness and interbeing. Throughout the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to send a question to Charles using the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Questions will be read during the last 15 minutes of the hour-long presentation during our Q&A. Without further ado, we turn it over to you, Charles. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. Okay, so we have, how many people are listening to this now? 60
Um,
something, is that it?
yeah, we're well over 50 now, so we're doing
Yeah,
well. We have a sizable audience
yeah.
here.
But my experience is that I'm sitting in front of this box, this screen right here. So I guess I have to take your word for it that people are actually listening.
That's
But
true. I have the power.
but my physical experience that I've been kind of programmed with over thousands of years is that if there's nobody uh, whose face is responding to my words, then there's really no conversation happening. So I'll do my best to overcome that programming um, and get a sense that I'm actually speaking to real people.
I know it is a little bit it's a little bit like I suppose like radio, whereas
Yeah,
you're sort of speaking into a void, and you just have to trust
right,
that the people are out there listening.
right, or speaking into a camera, things like that. But which I do quite often. But usually there's an interviewer or and it becomes a conversation with that person.
Right.
Um, whereas this is something more of a monologue, but that's okay. I can do that too. But I just want to. The reason I mentioned that at the beginning um, is that I think that one thing that people are really hungry for today, at least in our society, more than anything else, is just the experience of authentically communicating with somebody. And because I can't see your face, like if I were seeing um, your faces, if I were in front of a live audience, then I'd be constantly um, kind of tweaking what I say in response to the facial expressions and the laughs and the light in the eyes or lack thereof, and I'm getting feedback. But in this setting, the feedback is much more uh, subtle, almost imaginary, but maybe not quite imaginary. But
It's
anyway,
very
I'm just putting
siloed.
that. I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, I was saying it's very siloed. We have a few questions
Yeah.
streaming in, so
Yeah.
we
I'm
already.
sure you do. This is all just like a little disclaimer. You don't have to respond. Um, but the reason I mention it is just um, to say, if there's something a little unsatisfying about it, maybe that's it. So I'm just going to start by talking about um, a conversation that came up this morning. I've been traveling a ton recently, and now I'm home, kind of going into winter hibernation, but still having some. contact with the outside world um, via various kinds of media. And I was having a conversation with some folks this morning from, um, I think it's called the New Earth Project. And it's one of many kind of um, organizations or kind of, it's almost, I guess it is an organization, but it's also an idea that wants to transform the planet. And one thing and they have like kind of this plan. And one thing that I said is that um, that right now we know where we want to go, and we know that where we want to. I mean, we may not have every detail, but we have an understanding that, as I put it, there's a more beautiful world that's possible, and that this more beautiful world actually exists. It's not something that we're imagining. We know that it exists because we've seen it. Either we've seen it in visions, or we've seen it through experiences that we've had in life that show us beyond a doubt that human beingness and the world could be much more beautiful, much more authentic, much more joyous than what we've been offered as normal. We've had these momentary glimpses. Maybe they lasted more than a moment. And they could have come through various extraordinary means, or as kind of outbreaks through the ordinary, these moments of grace, these outcroppings of another world that's possible and not even that far away. So we've had these glimpses. And even though in those moments it seems that it's not that far away, maybe you're at the bedside of a dying person that you love, and the realization that only love is important is so present. And there's part of you that says, yeah, I can just completely reorder my life and live according to this understanding. But then we take a step back and we look at the way the world is right now and how very far we seem from this beautiful world that runs on love and generosity and compassion. Um, and not only are we so far from it, but it seems like we're going even the opposite direction as the forces of environmental destruction, of exploitation, surveillance, control, and so forth seemingly grow in their power. So here we are. We see a destination. We know the destination is real, but we don't know how to get there. Not only that, well, so that calls forth despair sometimes, because there's a voice that says it's impossible to get there. And if you think we can get there, you're being naive. You must not understand the way that the world financial system works. You must not understand the power of those who control the media and the surveillance state and the military industrial complex and Monsanto and the fracking industry. And you must, because if you understood this, you would know that it's impossible. That's all very logical. One thing I illustrate in the book, though, is that this logic is based on premises that not only are they untrue, but they are also the premises that form the foundation of our civilization and that are at the base of our world-devouring machine. Not only, okay, so it's illogical according to the truth, but logical according to the old story, to the narrative that surrounds us. But on another level, we know better. We know that not only is what we have seen true, but there is a way to get there. And even more, that we ourselves, as individual people, each one of us, have a necessary role and an important role and a unique role to play in contributing to the unfolding of this more beautiful world. I'm getting a funny thing on my screen. Okay. So where was I? Yes. So we have a sense that there is a path to get from here to there, but we don't know what it is. And so in these circumstances, the kind of um, kind of technology, there's kind of a meta technology for creating change in the world that we've subscribed to as part of our old story. And it says that the way to change the world in a big way is first you come up with the vision, and then you build a plan around that vision. And you talk about it and you debate it and you come up, all the smart guys get into a room and they make the plan. And then when they've all agreed on it, then they trot it out and impose it upon the world. So first, let's figure things out. That's the first step. You got to figure it out. You have to come up with the correct diagnosis, the correct analysis. And then you have to come up with a step-by-step plan, each step of which you can validate according to your understanding of causality. You do this and that happens, you do that and that happens, and so forth. That is a kind of, I would say that that's the mentality of technology as we know it. That's about imposing control onto a universe that does not have its own inherent indwelling purpose, intelligence, consciousness, or destiny that's inherent in it. It says the universe is basically this bunch of dead stuff, and any order or organization or design is something that we impose upon this kind of generic template, this purposeless melee of forces and masses. And I'm not saying that the alternative to that is a supernatural deity that does this job of imposing order and sacredness and consciousness onto dead matter. That's not actually a very revolutionary alternative. What I'm saying is that matter in and of itself possesses these qualities that we had once arrogated to ourselves alone. These qualities of self that we thought were only the property of human beings, they actually existed matter. So that's the mentality of technology, assuming a dead universe out there, separate from ourselves. And that's the same, or very similar mentality is among the assumptions of this technology, this meta technology of change, of coming up with the plan. And so what I said is, right now we're not in the kind of situation where that technology makes sense. That only makes sense if you can indeed devise a step-by-step plan to get from point A to point B. But that's not the situation we're in. We're in a situation where we have no clue how to get from point A to point B. All we know is that point B is there because we've seen it, and we know that it's possible to get there, but we don't know how to get there. So many of our technologies of control are not applicable. And this is true for many people on a personal level as well. When we entered this period of uncertainty, and the way that we knew how to be effective in the world no longer applies. And you enter this mapless territory where we're just entering into that. Many of us as individuals, like, how do you live life according to the principles of what in the book I call it the new story, but it's also a very ancient story, the principles of interbeing, the principles of living in a living universe where the qualities of self are in everything. Like, how do you live in that world? We don't know. And we can draw teachings from cultures who still do live in such a world and who know that they live in such a world. And we can draw teachings from wisdom lineages that have transmitted this knowledge through the ages and through stories and through all of the ways that we have to reconnect to this level of reality. But we're newbies here. And maybe the only way to learn this new territory and to begin to map it is to venture into it, to wander in it, to take some wrong turns, to hit some dead ends, to get stuck, to find each other in this new territory, to share our knowledge, to say, yeah, I took that dead end also. And here's how to recognize when you're about to walk into a swamp. And so we're learning the territory of interbeing. We're learning slowly technologies, ways of exerting our creative power in the world that don't depend on control. And this is really what the book is about. It's about technologies like the technology of story. It's about um, what it means to create change when force cannot possibly bring the changes that you want to see. How do you become an effective change maker? Where does the despair come from? What is it a gateway to? I talk about grief. I talk about evil, the war on evil, as one of the key elements of the old story that subverts our change efforts and tricks us into recreating more of the same, even as we think that we're changing the world. But we're actually just reenacting the war on evil, which is part of the old story, which reflects the conquest of nature, the attempt to conquer nature. And so there's all of these learnings, and habits of separation. When we feel powerless in our efforts to change and feel oppressed? Well, if we now understand that self and universe are mirrors of each other, then we begin to ask, well, what is this mirroring in myself? So you could say it's about the merger or reuniting of spirituality and activism. And it's not that spirituality is some kind of nice add-on to activism, but we're realizing that it's essential to being an effective activist and not replicating our own internalized habits and concepts and assumptions of separation into all we create. So I guess that maybe I'll leave it at that introduction right now. I have an hour. I don't think I'll just monologue on for 45 minutes. I think I'll leave it at this because I've touched on some, a few topics that people might be interested in, and I think I would just like to take questions, and I'll riff on the questions. I won't give short answers. I'll probably give long answers. But I think, yeah.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Charles. We have a few really good ones so far. So, Martina says, in the chapter Reality, you write about the first steps of making a change. Quote, the second step is to heal the wounds and doubts that vision illuminates, that vision illuminates, end quote.
Yeah.
How do you recognize these wounds and how can you go about healing them? And she also says, thank you for this incredibly beautiful and touching book and all the work that you do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so just to fill people in, the first step is to receive a vision, which is already a bit different than the meta technology of creation that I just described, which is to create a vision. When we create a vision, then there's part of you that's like, yeah, am I really making this up? Is it really possible? Is it arrogant? But when we receive a vision, then we can be in service to it. And many of us have received visions like this that are incredibly beautiful. This second step, it kind of crystallized in me when I don't know if you guys have this experience. When I look at something really beautiful, like a beautiful sunset or something, my pleasure at receiving that beauty is mixed in with pain. For me, it's like this intense feeling of loneliness. I want someone to share it with. I want someone to see it through my eyes. Even if I'm standing next to somebody, it's never quite enough. And what's happening, I think, is that the beauty is flooding through my system and flushing out these wounds that you mentioned, in your question. the way to tell the, to what alerts someone to the presence of these wounds is pain. Um, so the beauty of the vision brings out pain and doubt in various forms that could be clothed in words like like it's hopeless. We're never going to make it. We don't deserve it. I'm going to be left out. Nothing I do is enough. Um, humanity's already flunked the test. It's too late. Um, so these, and we might dress it up very rationally too, and even spend our time browsing collapse websites and near-term extinction websites and things like that. Um, and but really, like all of these stories and all of these reasons why it's impossible, these are just the clothing on something that hurts. And you'll find if you try to debate somebody who's very deeply immersed in despair, nothing you say will be enough to change their mind. They'll have an answer for everything. So really what's going on here is that the pain that comes out and the pain could take the form of cynicism. The pain could take the form of name calling. You're a dreamer. You're naive. You're a hippie. You're delusional. Um, the universe isn't. There's no hope. The universe isn't magical like you think. People aren't going to have a change of heart like you think. We have to be practical and overcome these people by force. I mean, a lot of times what practical means is to do something based in the world of force. So these, but what's happening here, the reason that addressing them on the level of logic isn't going to work is because what is calling for attention is this wound. You could call it the wound of separation, but it takes many, many forms. So how to heal that wound? I think it's through the power of attention and grief. And I mentioned both because the attention can't be just one's own attention. I don't think that I mean, I think it's a good start, to allow oneself to feel the grief for what's happening. If we don't feel it, it's not like the pain isn't there if we don't feel it as grief. If we don't feel it as grief, it still lives underneath the surface. If you avoid anything that provokes your anguish about the situation on this planet, if you avoid reading about, the dying of the coral reefs, if you catch a glimpse of the headline that half the Great Barrier Reef is already dead, and you just flick right by it onto something else, so that pinprick that would lead to a gusher of pain is bypassed. That doesn't mean that gusher isn't there underneath the surface. It is, and it causes a constant discomfort, a constant unease, and a constant desire to escape oneself through addiction, through entertainment, or whatever, which makes us ineffective as change makers because we're so caught up in running away from what is. So the pain is there anyway underneath the surface, but when we allow it to come to the surface in the form of grief, then the wound can be healed, and we're in reality because we're face to face with what's happening on this earth. But it's not disempowering. In a way, despair and cynicism are a way to bypass grief. There's almost a relief from grief when you go into despair, but it's paralyzing. So anyway, so private grief isn't enough. It's a good start to be able to begin to feel it. But I think really for healing to happen, we're not strong enough to heal on our own. We need to be held in community. And I think some of the most important work on the planet right now is creating uh, social structures, community structures in which grief can be held, which they were in many, many indigenous cultures. Um, and for grief to be held in community means that many, many people are giving you the gift of attention as you're feeling the grief. They're not trying to assuage the grief. They're not trying to comfort you. They're not trying to distract you and say, oh, it's not so bad. But they're just holding you in a field of attention. And that's something that we can do for ourselves and we can do for each other too. And one of the habits then that we might want to move beyond is the habit which is parallel to the mentality of technology, which says that we can endlessly engineer the world and avoid the consequences of our previous destructive actions. Um, we need to transcend the habit of doing that in our interpersonal relationships, where that same technological mindset tries to endlessly distract and it's not so bad and let me take your mind off it and to constantly engineer a way not to feel. I mean and then that kind of keeps things normal, and it keeps these terrible things on this planet that any one of which on its own, if we really seriously beheld it, would invalidate our entire system. It keeps them under the rug and it keeps normal functioning. And so bringing things into the light of attention, into just telling the truth and creating conditions where people are able to see the truth, that is a radically transformative act from which more, quote, practical actions will naturally arise. And then the question becomes, how do you create conditions that allow people to see a difficult truth? And I think that a lot of the tactics that activists use today are the opposite of how those conditions are created. Like, I mean, for me, if there's a painful truth that someone's trying to get me to see, and they attack me and they shame me, and they say, Charles, you've been, doing such and such, what a horrible person you are. My first reaction is to get defensive. I feel less safe to see these painful things, these maybe ugly things about myself, or these things that I've been doing. I don't feel safe. What makes me feel safe is when somebody can hold space with love, and I get the message that it's okay. It's okay to see this because you're loved no matter what. And then I feel safe. And one of the things I write about in the book then is how to translate this into even the political realm. Anyway, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and we actually have a question that I think dovetails nicely on what you were just talking about. So Catherine asks, what would you say to a person who is fighting corporate interests and believes wholeheartedly that they are the enemy? And you touched upon this, but maybe you can expand. You said something about holding positive space, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um,
I mean, obviously, you could say, well, read Charles Eisenstein's book, but what would be the
yeah.
maybe the shortest way to communicate the
Yeah.
message that you
I
have?
mean, so that's an interesting question because, it's one thing to say, what do you do to somebody who um, is angry about the decline of the American family and gay marriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you do about them? Um, but really, so even though I disagree with that person, and on many things I agree with the person who's fighting corporate interests, where they're coming from um, on an energetic level, if I may be so bold as to use a new age term like that, is the same. They're both coming from like the meta story, the invisible story that they share, is that there are some horrible people out there that have to be stopped by any means necessary. They have to be overcome, and we're and you and I, we're on the side of good, and they're on the side of evil. That story is part of the problem. But so then practically, um, uh, how do you interact with somebody like that? And I guess for me, the starting point is to recognize where that story comes from. The story, I'm on the side of good, and I'm uh, a principled, ethical person fighting on the side of good to overcome evil in the world. That comes from self-rejection. A lot of activism, whether it's on the right or the left, comes down to an elaborate attempt to convince oneself that one is worthy, that one is good, that one is valuable. It's a mechanism of conditional love, conditional self-love, which is, of course, a substitute for what we really want, which is unconditional self-love. So the way to heal, so that's the deep wound, this wound of self-rejection that this kind of crusading behavior comes from. And maybe the way to heal that is to give somebody an experience of unconditional love. Because I've had many of these kind of conversations where I'll make the point that, hey, if you were a Monsanto executive, you'd be doing the same thing that they're doing. No, I wouldn't. If I were in that position, I wouldn't be prosecuting farmers for planting their seeds. I wouldn't be doing this. That is saying essentially that you are different from me. That Monsanto executive is in a different category of being. Because if I were in the totality of his circumstances, I wouldn't do as he does. That means I am different from you. We are a different being. And that is not the world that we're moving into. That's not the story that we're moving into. So I might make points like that. And someone might even agree superficially. But then the next moment it's forgotten and they're back to acting from a place of hatred. But to answer the question, to provide an experience that a healing experience that invalidates the story of separation, the story of war, the story of hatred, by providing a data point that doesn't fit into that story. That can be done in very indirect ways. It can be done, by creating an experience of forgiveness or unconditional love, generosity, beauty. Another technique that I like to use is to tell stories. So someone might be ranting and raving about the disgusting behavior of Monsanto, and so I might say something that communicates that I know what Monsanto is doing in the world. So I might mention an atrocity even worse than they're talking about, and then I'll say, but I just talked to somebody, and this is a true story, by the way. I just talked to somebody a few weeks ago who moved from Portland, Oregon, or somewhere very progressive, to a small town in California where there were two employers. One was a military base, and the other was Monsanto. And this woman expected to go there and find all kinds of horrible, selfish people. But in fact, people were just as nice and generous and neighborly, if not more so, than the politically progressive place that she came from. People were, and they worked at Monsanto, they were executives at Monsanto, and they wholeheartedly believed in everything the company was doing. So that really, really threw her for a loop, because the explanation of people are doing bad things because they are bad people didn't stand up to her experiences. These were experiences that disrupted that story. And even telling stories like this can be disrupted, especially when you do it with good humor and truly not trying to shame the person. Part of the mentality of force is to make somebody change. You exercise this psychological force. You leverage, you twist this wound of self-rejection and say, change your ways and you get to like yourself. Change your ways and you can avoid the shame that I'm laying out there. you don't want to be a racist, do you? Because then you must hate yourself, because I hate you if you're a racist. You don't want to be someone who's part of the problem and not part of the solution. You don't want to be this, that, or the other thing. So that is a force-based mentality. And what does it create in the world? It creates more of the same. It actually strengthens the psychic substructure of the world that is going over the cliff.
Great. So we have a question that sort of goes back to some of the things you said at the beginning of the presentation about creating a more spiritual world. So Jania asks, how do you define spirituality, especially for those who consider themselves not very religious?
I never said creating a more spiritual world. I'm not sure where that came from. Um, and in fact, I purposefully avoid ever um, invoking spirituality uh, and saying that we need to become more spiritual, because I think it's really kind of the opposite. We need to become more material. We need to truly love matter and not direct our love to something that we imagine to be outside of matter, because that's what's killing the planet. We're discounting and demeaning and dismissing this beautiful material world. So the way I phrase it is that the qualities that we had exported into the realm of spirit, we're learning that these actually are part of matter. So qualities of intelligence, consciousness, purpose, desire, sentience, aliveness, these are not just in human beings. These are in the world, down to every particle of matter. So it's not that an electron is this dead building block that has spirit in it or is governed by spirit or something like that. It's that the electron itself is a conscious being. It's a being. It has beingness. And that's actually, there's a lot in quantum mechanics that at least on a metaphoric level bears this out. An electron goes through a slit, and it doesn't just, each electron makes a different choice essentially. One will go this way, one will go that way. Why? This is physicists say, well, it's random. It's just random. It's acausal. But an indigenous person would probably say, well, it's because each one is a unique individual, and just like we do, they make choices too. Because matter is intelligent through and through. Matter is alive through and through, from top to bottom. So I'm not, if I ever use the word spiritual, I really mean it in a non-dualistic sense, because I think that dualistic spirituality is really part of the problem. But we've had trouble articulating our sense of the sacred because we've lived in a scientific story that says that matter is devoid of the qualities of self. And any scientific theory that seems to suggest otherwise is met with intense hostility from the arbiters of scientific reality. So theories like, water memory or non-random mutations in biology. These are, or morphic fields, Rupert Sheldrake's stuff. Anything that says that there's an intelligence that isn't in the human brain is met with derision that far exceeds its, intellectual and empirical coherence, because they recognize that it's challenging on a very deep level, not only to scientific paradigms, but also to a whole society and a whole civilization that treats nature as if it were dead. So we've had trouble articulating the sacred in such a story of dead matter out there. And so our only escape valve, our only way to bring the sacred into to validate the sacred that's part of our experience was to say, well, it must come from outside matter then. So dualistic religion actually agrees with science. It says, yeah, you're right. Matter's just this bunch of dead stuff, a Newtonian clockwork, but there's this other thing outside matter. But I don't think that that's a um, very deep challenge. It's all part of the same story. And what we're going through now is a transition to something fundamentally different. That, just the one sentence to sum it up is, the universe is intelligent through and through.
Oh, nicely put. So speaking to dualism, we have a great question that I think sort of speaks to that. Um, the asker says, "I loved the chapters on doing and not non-doing. A keen awareness of these concepts in tandem seems an indispensable tool for moving forward into reunion, both personal and collective." Can you speak more to this interaction
Yeah,
about maybe moving forward into reunion and
yeah. I mean, often I say that um, doing is fine when you know what to do, um, but often we apply the habit of doing when, even when we don't know what to do, or even when we know that our doing is part of the problem, because we don't feel comfortable in the empty spaces. Part of that comes down to uh, our understanding of self and of time. That if you're um, a separate self in a universe of other, then your time and existence is limited by the the body that you are right now. And if we believe that the universe only changes as a result of the forces that we can apply and calculate the results of, then um, if you don't do, nothing happens. Um, so I'll say, in the book, I'm not sure how much I want to just rehash here, but I offer the metaphor of the man stuck in the maze, and he's running around and bumping into dead ends and circling back, and he keeps uh, ending up back where he started, and um, he grows more and more frustrated. And a little voice whispers in his ear, "You've got to just stop. You've got to just stop. You're not getting anywhere." I mean, isn't that like our society? You know, constantly pursuing this escape from the maze that we're stuck in. And through more technology or more laws or better control, like running around and around and around, and life isn't getting better, and it's becoming impossible to delude ourselves otherwise. So the man's running around, and finally, and he says, no, I can't just stop, because the only way I'm going to get out of here is by using my feet, by walking and running, and if I stop, then I'll never get out of here. I won't be getting any closer. I won't be making progress toward my goal if I stop running around. So he keeps running, just like we are, until eventually he's too tired. He's run around, and he finally, and like, oh no, I'm back here again. I just fought a whole war to end all wars, and now here's another war. I just proclaimed uh, a moratorium on climate change gas increases, and they've increased 50%. Like, and there's like this weariness, and he's back, and he just gives up. At that moment, he just stops. And as his breathing subsides, he he gets calm. He begins thinking over all of these passageways that he's been lost in, and he begins to see a pattern. um, an order in this madness, and he begins to understand why he stayed lost, how he's been habitually making the same choices at every passageway, at every choice point, and how there are maybe are other passages that he was running too fast to see. And so he begins to follow a different path that he would not have seen if he had kept running around. And there's more to the story too that came to me after I wrote the book, um, because when he's slowed down and his breath has calmed, he hears something too. He hears like a song. And when he gets to a choice point in the maze where he doesn't know which way to go, he just stops and he listens from which passageway is the song clearer and louder, and he chooses that direction every time. So he's following a song, and eventually he sees the light at the end of the passageway and he emerges out of the maze, and it's his lover that's been singing to him the whole time, hoping to lead him out. And I guess that's a long-winded answer to the question. I mean, I guess I can't really give you instructions on non-doing. I mean, there's a lot of philosophy, Taoist philosophy that you can read about it, and Buddhist philosophy, um, because it doesn't mean that you don't do anything ever. Um, it's more of non-contrivance, non-forcing. But doing from non-doing, doing arises spontaneously, and doings arise that were not even on your radar screen before the non-doing. It's kind of it's very similar to being in service to something beyond yourself, something that song maybe that can guide us, but it's not our own doing. It's being done through or something like that. But I'm just a little hesitant to get too philosophical about it, actually, because I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, and maybe the more I talk about it, the smarter I seem, but the less understanding there is. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. We have a question all the way from Spain from Javier that I think follows up nicely with that. He says, the real challenge for me is doing the things I want to be doing, serving something greater than myself, but so many things hold me back, including the perception of family and friends. So he says, how can he let go of the old story without feeling scared and under the shadow of the old story in the face of family and friends? Maybe those personal relationships.
Yeah, I would say that it's already happening, that you're already in the process of letting go, and that becoming aware that it's the perceptions of your family and friends that are holding you back is an important step forward. Because then the next question is, well, why do I care so much what people think? Um, at an earlier stage, maybe you would have been telling yourself, I can't do such and such because, and you would list these kind of practical reasons. But now maybe you're understanding, oh, actually, the real reason is that I'm afraid of what people would think. And why am I afraid of what people think? There's a wound underneath there. So what's happening is you're beginning to bring attention to the wound. And now you're not only doing that on a personal level, but you're speaking it out into the open. Um, and there's other people who are going through the same thing. So in ancient alchemy, the demon that was named became less powerful. Um, so it might even be that this is another opportunity for non-doing, to trust that attention and awareness is right now changing you into somebody who's no longer so governed by the perceptions of family and friends. there's nothing to do because it's already being done to you. And that can be very challenging, for me at least. It kind of pokes this habit of urgency to say, right now, there's nothing for you to do. What needs to happen is happening to you, and there's nothing for you to do. And anything that you do might even be getting in the way. Now, I'm not saying that this is always the case, that, there's a house on fire over there and you should just sit here and not call 911, or not. Like, I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm not advocating sitting on your ass as a universal solution to all problems. But but that kind of, okay, make a plan, get out there and do something stage has kind of expanded to encompass everything, and it's squeezed out all of the other parts of the process of being an effective creator in this universe. The latency, the contemplation, the healing, the grief, this, all of these parts of the process that we dismiss, that have no place in our understanding of who we are and how change happens. And I think for a lot of people, we need to trust the empty space more, trust the darkness more, trust that immersion into mystery and into uncertainty, and realize that we live in a generous universe, and that we are being given the experiences that will heal us. Yeah.
Michael actually brings up the chapter on scarcity, and he says that you write about the importance of community upholding us in the new story.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be something you recommend to Javier? Is expanding his
Yeah,
community?
I mean, I would. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's people around you who are trying to pull you into the old story, and they're saying, Javier, have you thought about your career, your job security? How about your retirement? How about, I don't know if you have children, but how about your kids? They're depending on you, and come on, things aren't that bad. You got to be a contributing member of society, and what's your problem? You're unemployed. You haven't been trying very hard. Maybe you're lazy. Like, there's all of these voices that are pulling you into the old story, and so it is really important to have countervailing voices that are pulling you into the new, like the things I'm saying now. And geez, I mean, there's 50 or 60 people on this call who are in a similar place, or they've been to a similar place, and would love to say to you, they would say, Javier, you're moving in the right direction. Your knowledge that was a lonely knowledge for a long time is true. You're here for something much more than what society has assigned to you. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do this work that I'm doing if I weren't getting tons of support from people around me that counteract the message of, Charles, you're crazy, which I get, in many different forms. Like, recently I was supposed to speak at the University of Oslo, and they canceled the talk after I'd already bought the plane ticket and everything, and removed the funding because the word sacred was in the title, and they can't be seen to, be indulging, airy-fairy bullshit in their hallowed halls of academia, basically saying, like, yeah, you're not legitimate, And so I get messages like that a lot in various ways, and I'm not an especially strong person, I'm not one of those people who has such deep faith that I can go on for years and years without being held by other people. Such people exist. They're rare, and most of them are not doing things publicly. Most of those people who are living according to a deep faith in and trust in the significance of their invisible actions, of their seemingly crazy, irresponsible, naive actions. Most of them are doing invisible things. Um, they're the woman, the young woman, instead of developing her career and going out with her friends and stuff every day after work, she goes and takes care of her grandmother who has no one else to take care of her. And nobody's appreciating it, not even the grandmother. Maybe the grandmother yells at her every day because she's in pain, and no one's appreciating it. And and even like the world that says um, that what's important and what's creating change is the big things, being a climate change activist, being a this activist or that activist. And here you are, not only are you not uh, developing your career, but you're not even helping change the planet because you're burdened with an old lady who's going to die anyway and who yells at you all the time. Like that's the person who's a hero to me. Those are the people. Um, and even just like a mother taking care of children, I think that requires a lot more faith than what I'm doing. Because I get, at least from a certain subculture, I get a lot of validation. People are writing me all the time, telling me wonderful things about my work. So I have a lot of help, which means really the way I see myself as a writer, is I'm pretty much an antenna uh, that that you, like this audience, like all these people are like taking a suitable piece of metal or something and saying, and here's Charles, and putting it in a position and holding it in a position where it can uh, bring in this information. But man, you guys stop holding me, and I'm out of there. I can't. I'm not like one of these powerful grandmothers, or these these people who are doing um, thankless work sustained only by their heartfelt sense that this is important and I can't be doing anything else right now. I'm not one of those people. Those are the people that I admire. Those are like the true Illuminati. And their actions, despite appearances, their actions are what is transforming the world. All the great souls have kind of stepped into the background. Those actions, the invisible ones that seem thankless and that you're getting no ego reward for, you got to trust the significance of those things. You got to trust that those are creating a powerful morphic field that that invites the same kind of trust and devotion all over the planet, and that's even changing the uh, kind of energetic context for the quote elites, the ones who appear to be making the decisions on this world, but who actually are the last to change. But just because they're the last to change doesn't mean that they don't need to change, and that it doesn't mean that they aren't going to change. But we just can't rely on them to change first and leave the rest of us. The leaders are the invisible.
Before we get to our next question, I just want to tell everyone thank you for your questions. They are pouring in, and I don't think we will get to all of them, seeing as we have just over 100 people in attendance now. So there are quite a few. Um, but I think Randy has one that follows up nicely, and he's talking about um, ritual as technology, and do you believe that ritual is a form of technology? Maybe the
Yeah,
woman who is tending to her grandmother.
yeah. Um, in a very broad sense of the word technology, I would say, yeah, ritual is um, a potent form of technology. You could even say that conventional technology as we know it, is a form of ritual. And we say, no, 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 ritual is just symbolic, but these things work for real. But shamanic people who do what we call rituals also believe that these things work for real. They have a world story, a story of cause and effect in which these are effective. They have a logic to it. So maybe there's much less difference than we think. But um, have been thinking a bit about ritual. I feel like honestly, I think that there's still something I don't understand about it. Um, one way that I see ritual is that it's a sequence of actions that seems more real and more powerful than other actions. It seems more significant. It's like, okay, I'm doing this for real. This is powerful. This is important. So in our society, things like signing a legal document or writing a check, signing a contract, um, those are rituals because it's real now because I'm signing it. You know. Um, Also around medicine, there are lots of rituals, um, and the rituals, especially the rituals around money. I mean, if you talk about rituals as symbolic action and the prescribed manipulation of symbols, then I mean, geez, that's what money transactions are. On a physical level, nothing's happening. Just we're pushing bits. Like we're exchanging at most pieces of paper with symbols written on them. It's magic. Um, so the power of ritual draws from the story that the ritual is part of, and it reinforces that story, which is why some cultures believed that if they stopped doing their rituals, the world would fall apart, that their rituals had a key role in maintaining the fabric of reality. And I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss such beliefs. Um, I think it's true. Um, and when these cultures were disrupted and their world stories were disrupted by schools coming in, by medical clinics coming in, all of these things that invalidated their world views, their world story, then their rituals stopped working too. They stopped doing their rituals, and in a very real sense, their worlds did fall apart. So the same thing is happening to us now. We caught a glimpse of it in 2008 when for a moment it looked like the symbolic system that we call money was going to stop working and all of these rituals were going to become powerless. And right now you perform the ritual of putting in your PIN number, and magic happens. People give you stuff. Stuff arrives via UPS in the mail just because you did this little ritual. The ritual is powerful. Powerful meaning that physical reality changes as a result. But we caught a glimpse that that isn't working very well anymore, and already like at least in the United States, the things that we used to be able to do that started with the ritual of a budget, a contract, a work list, and so forth. These are rituals. These are symbolic systems, manipulation of symbols. The things that we once were able to do, we can no longer do. And we say, well, there's just not the money anymore. But what's really happened is that our creative power is shifting. The power is going out of our old stories. So the question then is, what are the new rituals? What are the symbolic actions that make sense in a new story, that draw from a new story, and that reinforce a new story, but that have no home in the old story? And some examples would be around holistic medicine. That might be a starting point. Think about it. But there's something else about ritual too that I'm just beginning to learn about.
Hmm. We Shanti has a question about a very specific ritual here. It has a small story that goes with it. She says, Charles, I remember you sharing in your presentation at the Integral Center in Boulder, Colorado, that you received your own personal glimpse of a more beautiful world when you took DMT. Would you please expand in this key experience with DMT or any other sources like ayahuasca, which are sacred technologies of reunion? And uh, uh, can you
Yeah,
expand on that?
I mean, I think actually the experience I was talking about in Boulder, I'm not sure, but I think it was an LSD trip, not DMT. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was like an undeniable glimpse of a much, much bigger reality. uh, that I just couldn't deny, and I can't say that that experience in and of itself was the single transformative experience that I've had, but it was one of a series um, of experiences around that time in my life. I was 22, so this is like, over 20 years ago. But it was one of a series of experiences that just kept on saying, nope, reality isn't what you thought it was, Charles. Nope, you've been living in a much smaller world than the real world. And I think it was a very, I mean, I look at it as a medicine. Um, and I think that, I mean, I'll say, since you mentioned ayahuasca as well, um, that LSD was the medicine of our time in the 60s, 70s, up through the 80s, maybe. Um, and it delivered, it's almost like, and I'm going to be speaking in maybe a poetic or a metaphorical way, um, but it was almost like it was, you know, why not? A conscious being that came to us through a highly unlikely coincidence, came to us with a purpose to deliver a certain new strand to our psychic DNA, to bring something into our culture, to awaken consciousness, to get us ready for the next thing. It was the medicine of our time, and I really believe now that even though it's still a valid medicine, I think that it's retreated, and it's a much less important medicine today. Today, the medicine of our time is ayahuasca. I firmly believe um, that is, that has kept a gift, that has a gift for us, and that it's been kind of held safe through the cultures of South America that have, kind of kept it um, ready and waiting for the time when it would deliver its gift to mass civilization. Um, yeah.
All right. Well, I think we are over an hour now. So if you're up for maybe one last question, and we could
Okay.
maybe end it there. But we have a lot of great ones to choose from. But maybe just continuing on this path of ritual, um, Talia asks, so back to the ritual of money, do you think we actually need this?
Well, we have to have some way to coordinate the creativity and gifts of human beings on a large scale. Uh, if you're below a scale of maybe 500 people, you definitely don't need money, um, because everybody is aware of the needs of the people around them. And the division of labor is at such a rudimentary level that you can meet people's needs directly, or somebody who can meet their needs directly. But today we have to have a way to coordinate millions of people doing highly specialized work. And how do you, if you're, say, an electronic engineer, how do should I spend the next month designing this kind of circuit or that kind of circuit? You need some kind of signal from the collective that says, hey, this is what we need. And money can be, and to a certain extent is, that signal. It's not working very well, and it's working less and less well, and it carries with it a very dark magic, um, which I wrote about in Sacred Economics, and it comes down to the debt system. But ideally, money should be a way that signals you to where the need is when it's not something that's right in front of your face. So it's like a signaling molecule in a human body, that this cell puts this out and says, here, this kind of resource is needed here. So I think that, ultimately money will evolve into something that we would not even today recognize as money. But that said, I'm not one of those people who says, let's abolish money tomorrow. Like, I think that we need not only a transition, but also some way to coordinate this vast collective organism that is newly emerging. I mean, the challenge before us is to is to translate the social practices, um, the knowledge of interbeing from a context of a very small scale society into today's context. And that's, like I was saying at the beginning, that's a place that we don't know how to get there from here. Um, and it's a new territory that we're at the edge of. That we're at the edge of.
Yeah, I think we're on the cusp of the age of reunion, right?
Yeah, that's what I like to. That's what I think. Although I'll say, like, I have moments of despair as well, um, which again, I now more and more I'm thinking that that the real energy underneath it is unresolved grief.
Mhm. And we need to accept that grief and grieve.
Mhm.
Well, I think that was a great Q&A session, and we had so many good questions. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. We realize it is a weekday, um, kind of a hard time for a lot of people. I'm going to pull up a slide here, our ending slide, that has a little bit more information about Charles's website. Please keep in mind that you can find all of the ebook versions of Charles's books for 50% off at nabcommunities.com right now through December 15th. And you can also visit charleseisenstein.net, and he has a lot of great essays posted, as many of you know. His tour schedule, which is upcoming. Charles, where are you off to next?
Well, I'm hibernating for a while. I'm doing something in Boston in January, and at Kripalu actually. That's like a weekend thing that will go much deeper. Um, and then in Indonesia in February, and India I'm going to be in March. A lot of foreign stuff. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds great. What sort of things do you like to do in India? Have you been before?
I've only been for a day. I haven't really been to India.
Oh, that's
But yeah, I'm
cool.
going to speak and stuff. I don't know.
Definitely on my bucket list. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We will post the recording of this webinar if you'd like to review it to YouTube, and we will be sending out that link via email. So thank you to everyone who attended, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks.